All right. I'm Susan Campbell, and I do these monthly free group coaching calls. And this is my way of getting in touch, staying in touch, I should say, with the people that I've interacted with in the past or people on my subscriber list on Substack. So thanks for coming. So today, I want to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is this whole area of trigger work and what that means and what that's for, and a little bit about how you do it. And then I'll do it with some volunteers if you wish. So, I think you all have an idea of what it means to get triggered. And I want to remind people that when you are triggered, there's some kind of a nervous system reaction that tells you that you're not safe. You may be fine, you may be safe, but your nervous system is reacting sometimes in a large way, sometimes just in a little irritation, judgment, that kind of thing. All that stuff means you're slightly triggered. There's certainly degrees of trigger reactions. Some of us have more sensitive nervous systems than others, and part of that is genetic. Um, so the biggest reason why we want to do trigger work is so that we can show up present and available for all the different things that happen in our lives. Be able to actually see a situation clearly, assess it clearly without old baggage, old fears coming in to narrow your perception. Because when your nervous system doesn't feel safe, you're in protection mode, and your options, your sense of options just automatically narrows. Like somebody will say something to you that's like a little advice, and you'll maybe have a reaction, I'm being controlled. That's a story, but one form of a trigger reaction is a story in your mind. I don't matter. I'm uh, being disrespected. I'm being controlled. My needs don't matter. Those are the kind of stories. So let's say you have a story that you're being controlled, and you might not see that you could say something like, well, tell me more about why you want me to do that. Or I don't feel like doing that right now. You know, just like normal options that you would have if you weren't triggered. But if you're triggered, it's like you have this frustration, this anger, and you might just all you can see is all you can see is I've got to protect myself now. I've got to get this person out of my space. So I hope by now you realize that when you're triggered, you're limited in what you can, how you can respond. And being able to respond to a wide variety of different changing situations is the mark of a good life. I think that's what presence means in the normal sense. I want to be present to the actual data that I'm experiencing. So uh, I want to say something about brain science just to kind of help us all normalize the idea that every single human has this bias toward I'm not safe, because there's this primitive part of the nervous system called the amygdala. It's in the midbrain. And what brain scientists call a survival alarm system. So that amygdala area is scanning for danger. Now, we have a higher brain that is more realistic, more objective, but there's this amygdala that's very powerful, and it records old traumatic memories or old memories where you somehow didn't feel safe. So the word trauma can just mean not safe, needing a certain kind of care that I didn't get. Maybe, once or twice, or if you have a basic, secure, safe, consistent environment, you can handle normal frustrations of childhood. But if you don't have that bonding, that foundation of security, uh, little hurts, like being ignored as a child, that sort of thing, being criticized as a child, those things get recorded in your amygdala. And the amygdala doesn't have a sense of time. It doesn't have any kind of sense of past, present, and future. So these old memories are just recorded in there. And when anything happens in your present life that feels, subtle, it's subtle, that feels similar in any way to frustrating or depriving kind of events in your past when you were little and helpless, you'll react as if that threat is present. And so we all have that liability wired into our nervous systems. And if the sooner we can learn to accept that it's there and watch for the early signs of it, the better we'll be at realizing, okay, that's an old story. Boy, that's the kind of thing I always come up with when this kind of situation happens. When I think somebody's controlling me or somebody doesn't give me the response that I want, and I think they don't love me or they don't respect me just because we have a difference. A lot of people react in a triggered way to a disagreement. And that's the crisis that we're in humanity right now. We just can't handle our differences very well yet. But we're evolving, and this trigger work is part of us evolving ourselves to be more present and aware and have a range of options rather than just narrow reactivity. So the biggest impediment to learning about how to manage your triggers is accepting that you have them. That's really hard for a lot of people. We feel somehow uh, like bad or wrong or insufficient. And we know this because we tend to get mad when other people do things that trigger us. We go, why did you do that? Well, why did you do that? That reaction tells me that you are not handling that. You don't know how to handle that in a creative, constructive way. That, whatever that was, like somebody walking out while you're talking, or somebody interrupting you, or those kind of normal communication triggers. You don't know how to handle that. And so, you react automatically because it puts you back in touch with your insufficiency. Uh, when we see ourselves like reacting because we don't like to handle certain realities, how do we admit that? How do we go, yeah, that happens to me sometimes? I mean, situations just come up that surprise me, that shock me, that hurt, disappoint, and those kind of things. Those are all like normal pains of adult relationships. Now, children need more TLC. They really do need more accommodation to their needs. But when you're an adult, it behooves you to be able to like receive unpleasant information, inconvenient truths. It's an important part of being an adult is to be able to manage something that's uncomfortable. So let's say it's hard for you to admit that you do have triggers. And you notice yourself blaming the other person for triggering you, or getting into a conversation like, well, you were triggered and then I got triggered. Like, who got triggered first? A lot of people will argue once they've realized they're both triggered, who started it. All of that stuff is just evidence that it's really hard for us humans to accept that we do get triggered. If we could, and so my work is all about let's get real about the fact that almost all of us had things that happened in our childhood that created some insecurity, some doubt about our lovability or our worthiness. or our goodness. And those things now are still in our adult personality, but they're not real. They're stories. They're fabrications uh, where the mind tries to make sense of why am I so upset? So in brain science, we find that, and there's a lot of research about this. This is reported in my book, 5 Minute Relationship Repair, where brain scientists will just stimulate certain parts of the brain. Nothing's happening in the outside world, but they're stimulating certain parts of the brain. And then they'll ask, like, why are you crying or why are you laughing? You know, the experimenter will ask that question because they've stimulated certain parts of the brain. And the person will come up with some fairly logical sounding story, like your assistant has a funny tie on. That's why I was laughing. I mean, they just make stuff up. The mind needs to have reasons for why am I so upset. So if we could just get a little distance on a lot of these automatic nervous system patterns and not think there's something wrong with us when we get triggered. That's where I'm trying to come from is let's normalize this whole uh, area of inquiry because it happens so much. Uh, so sometimes I'll ask an audience. There's not many people on the screen here right now, so I won't ask you, but I'll ask an audience, how many people understand that triggering is normal and natural? And almost everybody will raise their hand. And then I'll say right after that, and how many of you, even though intellectually you know this, you still feel like there's something wrong with you when you get triggered? So, and they'll raise their hands again. It's easy to get the idea, but when you come back to, well, when I was triggered, I thought poorly of myself. So the idea here is we won't mind getting triggered so much. We won't mind blaming other. I mean, we won't need to blame others so much if we knew we had a reliable way of handling our triggers. So, but the first step is just admitting that, yeah, this kind of stuff happens. And then the next step is reviewing some of the times that you were triggered. And now I'll ask you to do that with me so that you get a sense of what are my tendencies, what are my early warning signs that I'm getting triggered so that I can spot triggers faster and then bring some breath, some grounding, some self-care to myself. Because that'll be once you've noticed you're triggered, how do you calm and comfort yourself? But first, there's a thing that I call your trigger signature. So think of a time when you got triggered. So I'm going to guide you in a self-reflection activity here for a minute. Just think of a time. And we're talking in an adult relationship now. It could be with a child, but you're an adult when this happens. Most people will think of something in one of their significant relationships. So I'm really talking about relationship triggers, not that you almost got hit by a car. That's not the field of inquiry here. I mean, there are some times when you should fear for your life, even as an adult. We're talking about what I call the normal pains of adult relationships. So think of a time and what was the situation? What was the scene? And I'm going to well, I was going to throw up a screen share, but I'm going to wait on that. So once you've got that, think about what happened. What happened that was triggering? What did you hear? And then what did your mind do with that? Sometimes you'll be aware of a kind of we call it the reactive story, like she's trying to control me, or God, I can never get it right with him, or I try to keep things calm. Why does this keep happening to me? These are all stories. My voice doesn't matter or my needs don't matter. That's one of the most common stories. And that one and I'm not enough. Some version of I'm not enough. Those are the two most common reactive stories. And when we think of these stories, there's feelings and there's body sensations. But what was your story? And then maybe when you thought of your incident, a body sensation was the first thing you became aware of, like a big knot in your belly or a tight throat or feeling like punching somebody. That's body sensations can be very powerful for some of us. Others, the stories tend to be most potent, and that'll show you when you're triggered. And then there's feelings like frustration, anger, hopelessness. What was your feeling? So your trigger signature is being aware of when I get triggered, what story shows up, what feeling tends to show up, like frustration, anger, sadness, hopelessness, and what body sensation tends to happen. And most of us have just two or three, or even just one. We always get angry, or we always shut down. That deer in the headlights thing. That shutdown is just as strong a trigger reaction as slamming doors. Some of us who shut down think, I don't really get triggered. I just try to keep everyone calm when somebody else is triggered. Uh, well, that's your story. And I want to call your attention to the fact that when you're shut down, your range of options in the present moment is also very narrow. And it's some kind of fight, flight, or freeze, some kind of either getting the hell out of there, combating the situation, getting things to change, or shutting down so much that you don't have to feel anything. So those are the basic trigger reactions: fight, flight, freeze. There's also fawn and fold, but those are kind of variations on flight. So kind of, you probably have some general sense of what happens when you're triggered, but that is such a valuable thing to know. That's such a big part of self-awareness. So if you actually can go, yeah, I pretty much recognize when I'm triggered. And then that really, oh, if you have acceptance and can recognize these things, then you can quickly calm your nervous system. The whole idea of trigger work is to be able to quickly calm your nervous system so that you can come back to presence and deal competently and openly, lovingly, whatever, creatively to the present situation. Because, reality is not that predictable, especially in interpersonal communication. You say something, you don't know what's going to come back at you. So many people now have relationships only by text. I'm amazed at how many young people I'll talk to, and I'm making my voice kind of funny right now. Young people I'll talk to, and I'll say, well, how long have you been dating this guy? And she'll say, 5 months. And then I'll find out they've never met and they've never actually even talked on the phone or Zoom. They've had a text relationship. Well, that is an easy kind of relationship to avoid this moment to moment change that is life itself. I'm still rooting for people being able to deal with real life, ever changing, like a surfer has to surf a wave. There's so many factors, both internally and externally, that we have to deal with. It's complexity. That's the complexity of reality. Uh, and I'm, I've been watching our society, and I think we're getting worse and worse at dealing with that as things get more and more complex. And of course, I have to have some compassion for us because maybe things are getting too complex and they're above our pay grade. So maybe maybe that's why we're getting less good at dealing with complexity. But some of us are not. Some of us are continuing to grow and expand. So, and probably the kind of people that show up on my calls are more those kind of people. So you're getting a feel for what your trigger signature is. And once you know that, the whole idea is to pause and bring some awareness to what's going on. Like, oh, my heart's beating fast. And I'm just saying, uh, that person shouldn't have done that. Why did they do that? Why do they keep doing that? So you might have racing thoughts, and you can recognize this. And once you can like recognize it and pause and calm your nervous system, we do that with breathing consciously, slowly, feeling your feet on the ground or your butt on your chair, but really sensing it. When I say feeling in this case, I mean being aware of body sensations. And some of us aren't used to tuning in to the body. So just right now, just tune in, notice what you're feeling. And I'll just ask you, how good are you at pausing to regulate yourself when you're triggered? How good are you at that? That's one of the big keys to to healing these trigger reactions. What we're really saying is you admit them. I mean, you admit that they happen. You see when it's happening. You pause to calm yourself. And sometimes you have to have a pause agreement with the other person who tends to trigger you. For example, in a couple, couples need some sort of an agreement that we know we sometimes trigger each other and things start going around and around in circles in one of these reactive cycles where the more I try to get you to talk, the more you clam up. And the more you talk at me, the more I move away. We both have our own unique identities in these reactive cycles. So you 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 need a pause agreement to be able to stop that. That just does more damage. So you pause, and then the next step is, and I'll guide you a little bit into this now. If you thought of something that triggered you in the past, when I asked about, think of a situation, let's now feel something in your body, or it could be notice a thought. You can enter trigger work from any place, from your body, from your feelings, from your recollection of the incident, from the story. You just start anywhere and sense into what comes up in your body and in your mind when you reflect on that, when you have that thought or when you have that feeling of tightness in your chest. And you just explore that. Just think of it as once we've paused. So you really need to pause and bring calmness and safety to the nervous system before you want to go into inquiry. So the next step is inquiry. We need to be able to look into it. Okay, now that I'm calm, let me bring back some of that feeling intentionally. So that gives you some power over your triggers when you know you can bring it back intentionally, or you know that when it comes back when you didn't intend it, you can do some self-calming. So we're going to bring it back now, just with some space around it, with some awareness around it. So you're intentionally curious with a kind of tender heart. That's the idea. Once you're calm, you're going to, and once you feel safe, you can be tender and loving. When you don't feel safe, you're going to be self-critical or critical of the other person or judgmental of self or other. All of those, even judgmental thoughts, that's one of our big things that we humans do. There's something you don't feel safe with when you have a judgmental thought. Like it's that thing that other person did that you're judging. You're not really able to handle that very well. You might not be able to admit that, but that's why you're judging the other person. Otherwise, they would do this thing that you judge, and you would say, I wish you wouldn't do that. Or let's talk about, the dynamic between us right now. You just would like do something that's, I would say, responsive to the actual situation rather than trying to push it away or get above it in some way. That's, judgment. You're trying to kind of get control of something that kind of makes you feel not in control. But in a sense, if you're present and open and surfing life, which of course is an ideal that we don't match too often, but if you are present and open, you handle things as they come up. You handle things gracefully, creatively, and that is a good aim for us, even if it's unrealistic to think we could do that all the time. So back to holding yourself now with some tenderness as we look into this. Like if you feel something right now, just be with that feeling. We're not trying to figure it out so much as explore the contours of it. What's it feel like? Does the feeling move? When I say feel, I mean emotions or sensations, either one. You breathe and notice and see then what associations you have. Like I did a piece with somebody on Zoom that I posted on my Substack on a webinar recently where I worked with this guy. And the first thing that came up was a kind of, call it a trauma with his ex-wife. And it had a certain characteristic of somebody getting defensive when he tried to talk to them, so they wouldn't receive him. And then when he felt into that, old associations from childhood came up where he really couldn't get much attention from the adults, no matter how hard he tried. So sometimes you'll have a old association. So see if there's anything sort of, I call it the story of my life. The same feeling keeps coming up in me, whether it's my wife or my ex-wife or my mother or father or my sibling. Why does this keep happening? Well, it's some tender part of you that's been abandoned or repressed or pushed aside because, it made your adult relationships inconvenient or something like that. Or some part of you that you haven't fully felt, probably because there's a lot of pain there. Maybe there's grief at how your needs weren't met in certain ways when you were younger. See if there's anything like that there. And when you find something that feels tender, what we want to do is open our hearts to that. I call that your tender place. You bring love to that place as if it were a much loved child. You being there for yourself, you being present, available, loving for yourself right now as you do that. You're both the, in a sense, you're both the parent, the good parent, who says, honey, buddy, yeah, I get it. I'm with you. You're not alone. We may not have had any role models for that when we were little, but there's a good mother archetype inside each and every one of us. I've just discovered that by being in private practice for 60 years and seeing how many people who had terrible early childhoods still have that capacity for self-nurturance deep inside if they take the time to find it. So you might not be able to find yours yet, your good mother inner sense, the sense of compassion for yourself, acceptance of that tender part that you might also see as a weakness or something that gets in the way in your relationships. It gets in the way because it's calling for your attention. It's calling to be felt. And by feeling some of the pain of that old wound, you actually begin to heal your fear of emotional pain, which is, I maintain, one of the biggest uh, challenges that we humans have is to get over our fear of emotional pain so that that doesn't run us, so that we're not always in protection mode. Is it safe? Coming from that old wounded amygdala. So you're loving back into wholeness, this tender part of you that you maybe have either denied or rejected. And you can kind of, if you do have an early memory, it helps me to have like an age, even though the similar condition of deprivation or abuse may have repeated many times. Some incident or some age and some scenario where it happened in some significant way. It tends to help me and my clients anchor in, oh, I can love that 6-year-old or that 11-year-old, that type of thing. I can bring tenderness to that. And and that kind of softens your relationship to all the reactions to things that happen like this. And knowing that you can do that, and actually, the more you do that self-compassion work, I call it the compassionate self-inquiry. It's where you start with anything painful or distressing, and you just feel it, go into it more, be curious, let your attention be led by what comes up. There's really a natural healing process that I think wants to happen in humans because I've learned about this from just doing this with clients and following where they go. And almost always when there's damage back then in the childhood, there's going to be grief. There's going to be either tears or something that feels like tears. That won't happen every time you do the inquiry, but sometimes we do the inquiry multiple times. I mean, we need to do it multiple times, like for at least for a couple of years, keep doing it as a regular practice. And then after a while, you can do it real quick. But how many people are really disciplined enough to do it regularly for a couple of years? Some people are, though. I'm really surprised. And in my clientele, some of the most traumatized people are the most motivated and they are the most willing to do it. Uh, so that's just one data point. I'm not even sure if that's in any way universal. So you're bringing tenderness to this wounded part, and you just be there with that. And in a way, you're learning to soften around your pain and to bring more awareness and attention, like loving attention to that part, and it naturally integrates. You're not as afraid of that weakness. And that weakness sometimes, once it's integrated, can have you come across with a little more humility in your assertions. I mean, we want to be assertive and say what we want and what we don't want. I mean, that's healthy. But to have some kind of awareness, like when I ask for what I want, I'm also aware of that vulnerability that I might not get what I want. A lot of people deny that there's any risk involved at all. Not that it's a huge risk, not that you should consider every assertion a huge risk. After a while, you won't. You'll just be aware that there's some risk that, gee, I don't know how this is going to go. And it softens your assertion and you're more likely to get what you want. That's just one example of what integration does for you on a practical level. So I just want to have you sit with that now, let that sink in, and I'm going to see if there's any comments or questions. And you'll have to unmute yourself. So, is it Nils or Niles?
Yes, hi, Niels. Niels
Niels.
is.
Okay, Niels. Hi.
So, yeah, I'm asking about anger in that context because maybe many of us got afraid of our own anger and the destruction it can do on our relationships. And I think in that context, many times um, we get into this freeze reaction to
Hmm.
suppress our own anger. And I assume that maybe the acceptance of our anger also comes is the right reaction of accepting what is happening inside of us. But at the same time, I don't know when I'm angry. Is it because I'm triggered, or is this a just anger because anger is a signal that my boundaries are violated? You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I have real trouble to
great. Good question.
understand how to handle that and how to get a
Yeah.
healthy handling of my anger, because sometimes you need to express anger
Yes.
in relationships, I suppose, right?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say there's a difference between triggered anger and the kind of anger that you would rightfully use because your boundaries have been violated. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, I want to say before you even would think about whether, what kind of anger that is, whatever your anger reaction is, it deserves some loving attention too. And as you said, you suggested that. So I would first suggest that you spend a lot of time just feeling that anger, noticing it, feeling it with awareness. You have to build this safe space inside yourself before, I would recommend you go into strong feelings, but you're so there's kind of a dual attention that we learn in this work. And it comes naturally to humans as we develop. So you just feel what that anger is like, what it was in reaction to, and really do that internal trigger work a lot around your anger. Okay, so that's, piece of advice number one. The other piece is when you're angry about your boundaries being violated, have you conversed with this person in a normal tone of voice, in a regulated way a number of times? Because, when we say what we want or don't want, and I should get an example from you, and I'd like to in a minute, Niels, but I'll give it a generic answer first. When we get something that we don't want and we want to say, stop that or something like that, we need to be able to hold our water, as they say, enough to mark our boundaries more, maybe more than once in a given moment, or uh, you tell somebody something once, but it's not in the moment. You mark a boundary, but it's not an in the moment assertion. It's a generic one, like don't ever talk to me this way, and that's a boundary. Well, that's a very unrealistic boundary, frankly. Uh, people people just don't do that. They don't remember. I mean, some do, if when we're really able to handle a lot of complexity in our being at once, in our minds, we can hold another person's needs and not forget. But most people in their daily life, they're kind of more self-oriented, and they might remember if you reminded them that you had said, "Hey, I don't like to be talked to that way." But it happens. So you need to be realistic about how to mark boundaries. The way that generally works is, yes, you make a generic request, but then you also, uh, you know, don't pop off in anger if they forget. You have to reassert it in the moment. But if you reassert it in the moment and they don't get it, if you've done your work on your side of the fence and they don't get it, then you get angry. You need to be able to get their attention. Need to be able to, say, I need you to stop. And if you don't stop, I'm walking out. You need some way to protect your boundaries too, other than verbally. And sometimes there is no way if they're a lot more powerful than you are in some way. Um, I mean, sometimes there is no escape. I mean, once I had to just, well, somebody was trying to rape me in a foreign country, and I had to just scream bloody murder. I started out by reasoning with the guy, and the only common language we each had was a little bit of French, but he was Polynesian, and I speak English. But I tried to negotiate, and as soon as I saw that he was, serious about taking my clothes off, I just screamed so bad. And I mean, and that's an example of what you got to be able to do when it's really serious. Oh, but most people would probably freeze in that situation. Uh, I guess I don't know. That's a kind of unusual situation. So, Niels, tell me your reactions to some of the things I've just said.
Um, Let me think about it. So I have a situation in mind where
Good. That would be
I
good.
um, I was on holiday for 2.5 weeks with a friend, and I found her to be very domineering, and it it was only weeks after that holiday that I realized I must have been triggered maybe the whole second half of that vacation.
Mm.
And on that, I realized that I tried to be just and um, expressing my boundaries in a fair way. But later I realized I was really stonewalling her and maybe projecting a lot of like overpowering dominance into her that was not actually there. So I have confusion about what is actually was a real boundary violation by her and
Yeah.
what was me projecting that boundary violation into our relationship. And I have no answer until now. So it's really difficult for me to, yeah, when you had that in the past, to even I was able to, in a conflict um, talk that we had right at the end, I was able to sit with my feelings in that situation and not try to push them away because I was self-aware enough that this wouldn't be the best idea to just pretend they are not there. But still, it was a whole ordeal. This whole vacation was an ordeal, and yeah, I still don't know whether maybe there are some people which are just not too good partners for vacation, and maybe you should not. So I cannot really say whether she's what was her fault of that, or is there a fault on any side at all? Maybe we were just not a good match in that regards. And yeah, I don't know how that
Yeah.
whether that really is a good example to answer your question.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
a great,
but that was where I was coming from.
yeah, I'm going to ask you a few more questions, but first I want to say it's a great example. And people who maybe you shouldn't have gone on vacation with may be your biggest learning partners for learning about yourself. Not that you want to repeat that too many times, but what I would want to do with you, even now, or you can do it with yourself, is remember one of the times on that 2 week vacation that you had the story that she's being domineering and you got angry. And and just can you go back? I'll just guide you a little bit. Can you go back to that and like bring back what that felt like? And you're suggesting that you have already done that. I would suggest you keep doing it for a while, and your answer will become probably more clear. But and I'll tell you what I think your answer is going to wind up being in a minute. Uh, but let's just like bring back that memory and the feelings. And if you're willing, Niels, what are some of the stories that play in your mind, the self-talk, the actual words? See if you can.
Um, yeah, well, she was also very open about her um, family situation and her yeah the problems that occurred in between the family members there. And that immediately I realized that I was creating reactive stories in my head, explaining, of course, she behaves like that towards me because she's traumatized herself.
Yeah.
I do not have to take her seriously. She's damaged,
Mhm.
and I should not accept this at all. And it was only later that I realized, oh, maybe it was um, because I could not tolerate the feelings, so I needed to create this reactive story as a to protect myself in a way. Um,
Maybe you
yeah,
were not able to say, I don't want to hear any of this. Not maybe not in that callous way, but whatever. Maybe I don't, whatever she's talking about, I mean, that was
mm,
irritating you. I'm not up for this conversation. Can we talk about something else? Or this is bringing up something, this is bringing up irritation for me or impatience. And I don't think I'm,
yeah.
I don't think I'm going to be a good audience for what you're doing over there. I
But it
mean,
was not at all the details of the stories she told me was not at all a problem for me.
what
It
was the
just
problem?
helped me.
What
Yeah,
was the problem? What
the
was?
yeah, the problem was that we could not agree on anything. It was more like she was commenting on my driving style all the time. It was always discussions about that. I always felt violated in a way that she
Uh-huh.
was
Good. Those are
yeah
good examples. That's
guiding my driving skills. We could not agree on any hiking routes. It was like a hassle all the time. I mean, it doesn't sound so serious now, of course, and
yeah.
I mean, it's petty arguments
Mhm.
now that you look back at it. But I was really triggered, I would say now,
Yeah.
and it was only that the her family story that she gave me
Yeah.
helped me create this reactive
Yeah.
story to
That story. Yeah. To create
yeah
distance. Yeah. So that I understand that.
to paint her like an um yeah, she became like a villain even though I didn't
Yeah.
intend to make her a villain, and that was so strange for me later
Yeah.
to find out that this just happened inside of myself. And then it's again difficult to understand which of this anger is justified because it was actually a boundary violation, and which of this anger is more maybe directed towards my mother,
Mhm. Yeah.
which dominated me in my childhood maybe.
Yeah.
and made me suppress my anger because my anger needed to be um, was maybe too much in that time at that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that
And
would be maybe the reason why I'm doing that.
well, yeah, you do have, so you're kind of acknowledging that you do have some kind of sensitivity to being suppressed. I mean, you're thinking your mother might have suppressed your anger or being controlled, and as we're mentioning that, let's just bring a little tenderness to that, just as you speak. You don't have to go into a big, deep inquiry, but oh, yeah, I was a kid who my self-expression wasn't welcome a lot in my early environment. Okay, so we just bring a touch of loving tenderness to that. And then coming back to you in the car, let's go there. When she was advising you on your driving, did you tell her that, well, how did you attempt to mark your boundaries? Let me not give you words. Did you attempt to mark your boundaries at that time and ask her to not do that?
Yes, yes, I did. Um, it's just that 2.5 weeks is just a very long time, so there's a lot of time for tensions to build up. So,
Yeah.
and I found I had a very interesting learning from that also because I realized just going away for an extended weekend or 3 or 4 days wouldn't have exposed any of that because I would have easily just said, um, well, let's just give her leeway. It will
Mhm.
be over soon anyways.
Soon.
And that would have been a very common approach in my past relationships also
Yeah.
to
Notice that too, Niels, that
give in to save
when
the
you're
peace for now because
it'll be over soon.
it's less difficult than doing the uncomfortable thing and making it a problem.
Yeah. Because sometimes, let's say you do say, this is bothering me. It's not helping my driving. Please stop. And you in normal tone of voice, and then even a couple of times, um, she keeps at you about your driving. Often you have to get above the level of the problem and say, look, I've told you that this is disturbing. I've asked you not to do it, and you keep doing it. So I'm getting angry. Oh, I'm I'm needing to mark some kind of a boundary. Why aren't you getting it? And you try, you let her know that you're getting angry, and sometimes with a little more force, that gets across to the person, but usually we aren't able to have graduated uh, responses to the moment. We go out of dialogue very quickly. Like, what is it about you that's so afraid every time I pass a car or something? You can converse about things. Um, but the tendency for somebody who has issues about being controlled uh, is going to go right to a heated reaction. And sometimes, with couples who are together for a long time, who've worked out a lot of their differences, I think, an angry response back and forth once in a while, the other person knows, okay, whoops, I forgot to shut up. You're with somebody you love and they say, get out of here. I don't want to hear that. You can do that with secure relationships. Most of us don't even get to the point where anger can be handled in our relationship. That would be my ideal relationship, which is what I've generally been able to create in my life, not always. So, you know, the the thing you kind of know that you have a sensitivity around this. Let me just say something for everyone about 2-week vacations or anything with anybody, even your longtime partner, you're much more interdependent when you're away from home and out on vacation. You're going to have a lot more decisions to make, and there's going to be a lot more room for triggering. So, just accept that. That goes with the territory because of the interdependence. The same thing of when two people who live apart all of a sudden start living together, a lot more interdependence, a lot more triggering. Have a baby, a lot more interdependence once you have a third person in you. Have a baby, more triggering. So the more interdependence, the more opportunities for you to butt up against each other. Like you said, Niels, we want to do different things. Now that difficulty not getting our own way is a normal human frustration, and it triggers most of us to either adapt or to kind of blow up. And it sounds like you kind of have alternated between the two, right? Sometimes you,
Yes, I would say so. I
yeah,
would say I adapted, got angry about it, and
mhm,
then at some point I started stonewalling, I would say. But
yeah, yeah,
well, yeah, just
yeah,
becoming very cold. So it's
yeah. And when you find yourself in any kind of a pattern like I've described, where she keeps at you about your driving, or you keep having disagreements, and it's building up in you. You have to step, what I said before, above the level of the problem and say, hey, we keep butting heads. We got a week more to go to this vacation, and this is extremely unpleasant. Can we talk about it? And sometimes you just need to like clear the air about it. And but again, you can't do that with an agitated nervous system. So what your bottom line question was, is it me or is it her? And I'm going to say it's probably both in your case. Sometimes it really is 90% the other person, but that's rare. And even if it's 90% the other person, sometimes if you really inquire into anything that bothers you, you'll find some of your own limitation in there. I'm limited in dealing with this kind of situation. I adapt too quickly and then I blow up. Well, that's a limitation. You'll discover a limitation in yourself, which deserves compassion. And so we're looking for whose fault it is. Okay, no, the ego likes to do that, but it's probably both. And so what? So I think I'll leave you guys with that because it's 11 o'clock, and I'm really glad that you spoke up, Niels. I want to appreciate you for that, for bringing some juiciness
no
into
problem.
into the conversation. Yeah, thanks. I want to say thanks for being a good sport. So, and thanks to the rest of you, and just stay in touch through my Substack. Susan Campbell 99 at substack.com is how you reach me, how you stay in touch with me about these events that I offer. All right. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Susan.
Hmm.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan.